We've got Captain Daniel Andrews here of Captains for Clean Water, founder, organizer. Good to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me, Ken.
Can you give me a little bit about how your organization was founded? What was the genesis?
Sure. So it was definitely not on purpose that we founded it. Was sitting around with a couple of buddies one night. We were just really upset that we couldn't be fishing, and the more research we're doing on it, the more we realize how political this issue is, and how it's been swept under the rug for essentially the last 20-30 years with very little progress. And we just decided to get involved and wanted to get some basic education out to our charter clients. That was our original intention, and it quickly spiraled. I mean, within a couple weeks we realized that kind of had a tiger by its tail and needed to put a lot more resource into it than we were initially planning.
Yeah, you were a full-time charter captain, right?
Yeah, I fished for tarpon, snook, and redfish out of Sanibel area, Pine Island Sound. Love tarpon fishing. Wish I was doing that right now, but it's been a really cool experience, and we've all had a really good time doing it.
But now, with the explosive growth of the organization, this is now your full-time job, I guess.
Yeah, it's my full-time job, and we also have a great team. We have 5 staff members now, and we're still growing. It's such a big problem, and when you're talking about a public policy issue that's going to require $15 to $20 billion worth of funding over the next decade or so, it's not going to be fixed by 1 or 2 people. We always say it's not about 1 or 2 people knowing everything. It's about everybody knowing the big picture. And we intend to continue to grow our organization, get a lot more members on our team, and really keep pushing, because this is something that we can't afford to do anything other than everything we can. If we don't go full bore and do everything we can, then we're going to lose this forever.
It's called Captains for Clean Water. You have captains from all segments of the fishing industry, backcountry all the way to offshore.
Yeah, and our membership is really interesting, really diverse. We have members in all 50 states. When we ask our supporters to do something for us, I mean, we'll get everything from, fishing captains, inshore guides, fly fishing guides, offshore, meat fishermen, you name it, as well as, parents and grandparents and people that have never been fishing before. One of the coolest things that I've seen since Captains for Clean Water started is we'll have a grandmother call us up and make a donation and buy some hats and stickers for her grandkid who comes to Florida and fishes all the time. And to her it's really important because she just likes hearing the stories of her grandson or granddaughter saying, hey, we had this awesome experience in Florida, but there's problems there too. So it's something that's it affects everybody, and we have that story, the grandmother or the parent all the time. I mean, it happens, a couple times a month. We get different scenarios like that. So.
Now, your website really outlines the nature of the problem and the fact that the water overflow from Lake Okeechobee is being back pumped or down into these estuaries, and there's a disruption of the natural flow to the Everglades, and the whole host of problems. It's really outlined very well on the website. But can you hit some of the high points that you see in terms of environmental impacts, plants, sea life, water quality?
So the problem that we have in the Florida Everglades is it used to be a free-flowing river of grass that started just south of Orlando, flowed into Lake Okeechobee, and overflowed the southern part of Lake Okeechobee into what we call the Everglades today. Now it's largely agricultural lands. It used to be all wetlands. That water would flow through there and then down into what's now Everglades National Park and into Florida Bay. But instead, what we're seeing is only about a quarter to a third of the fresh water that historically flowed to Florida Bay pre-drainage makes it there, and the rest of it gets shunted to the west coast and the east coast of Florida, the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie estuaries. And as a result of that, anytime you change freshwater flows to an estuary, if you add freshwater or remove freshwater, it's going to cause an imbalance. And the imbalance you see in the Everglades and Florida Bay, it causes hypersalinity. Florida Bay is like a big ice cube tray. It's this massive expanse of very shallow grass beds surrounded by sandbars. And what we see when we're not getting that freshwater flow is evaporation starts to take place, and the water gets saltier and saltier and saltier until it becomes what we call hypersaline, way too salty. And it will actually get so salty that it won't be able to mix with the tidal water that's coming in and out of the bay. And you see massive expanses of dead seagrass. In 2015, they lost about 40,000 acres.
That's what I was thinking of, the Dead Sea, right?
Yeah.
It's so saline that there's nothing in it.
Yeah. And then the other side of the problem is the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie River are getting way too much fresh water. So in areas where there's supposed to be turtle grass and eelgrass, it dies. You know, it's too fresh. It's too fresh for the oysters, so they all die. And it's it's this imbalance, and that's been our thought process with Captains for Clean Water the whole time. You know, we've got all of our buddies that are fishing guides down in the Everglades begging for the water, and then the East Coast and the West Coast, we're getting way too much of it. We're saying don't give it to us. And for 20 years, special interests and politicians have tried to cause divide. You know, they didn't want the East Coast, the West Coast, and the Keys, and the Everglades anglers to be together, because we all want the same thing. We want the Everglades restored so this doesn't happen again.
Right.
But they, there's always been this, this effort by, some of the industries and individuals that benefit from the current system to cause divide. It prevents solutions from happening.
Now, up in my part of the country, near the Chesapeake Bay, we had a problem with nutrient runoff from chicken farms and agricultural practices and creating dead zones and a whole host of problems. We've been working to clean that up. And I know down here in Florida, you've got the problems with the blue-green algae, especially on the Atlantic side, I believe, right?
Well, it's
So on both?
East Coast and West Coast. Yeah, last year in 2018, it was that was the worst cyanobacteria bloom we've seen in Florida. It was the Caloosahatchee River that we saw that.
A lot of health impacts here, potentially, to not only the stuff that lives in the water, but people living around or on the water.
Yeah, and some of our team at Captains for Clean Water was spending a lot of time taking media out and showing them what's going on, taking scientists out there. And many of us developed really bad coughs, respiratory issues, really itchy eyes, scratchy throats, and it lasted for like 6 months. It was that initial exposure, and my wife was getting frustrated with me because I was coughing so much for 4, 5, 6 months after.
Yeah. What about the red tide, right? On the Gulf Coast
Yeah.
side.
So red tide it's a naturally occurring phenomenon. It starts offshore, 50 to 100 miles, and then what we've seen in recent years, it's been happening for a long time, but since our staff has been paying attention to this, and even before we started the organization, just as fishing guides, what we see is when that red tide gets inshore, sometimes it will just explode. It'll get way worse. It'll stay inshore for a very long period of time. And we've noticed that when there's discharges from Lake Okeechobee, that's a lot more likely to occur. We have dry years when we're not getting the discharges. We usually don't see those red tides that stick around in our bay for weeks or months. But last year we did. We had these massive discharges. We had blue-green algae coming out the Caloosahatchee River, red tide, all in the same waterways, and the concentrations of the bloom got so thick it looked like hand sanitizer washing up on the beach. It was a gel, just from all the Carenia brevis cells they were so thick it literally looked like Purell hand sanitizer. So there's a lot of debate about this. I shouldn't say debate. There's a lot of unknowns with this in the science community. They just don't have enough data on this to say what the connections are and how it can be. But what we do know is that Carenia brevis feeds on primarily nitrogen, but also phosphorus. And when we're discharging water from Lake Okeechobee, we're putting, tons and tons of nitrogen and phosphorus into the water bodies where that red tide is living. So it's pretty easy, from the observational perspective to see that there's, that's a serious cause for concern. We need to do everything we can to help alleviate that.
Yeah, it seems like besides the health considerations for people and marine life, there's going to be a huge economic impact on an individual level for property owners along these waterways or along these lakes.
Sure. So when we have discharges from Lake Okeechobee, when the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie turn brown, that immediately devalues real estate in Lee and Martin County by $1 billion. That's Florida Realtors did a study on that. So that's just the real estate perspective. But when you're talking about close to a $10 billion recreational fishing industry in the state, and the tourism aspect of South Florida, I mean, people come to Sanibel and Fort Myers and Stewart because they want to visit and spend time in the water, and when we don't have clean water, they don't show up. So then it's the restaurants, the hotels, the rental car companies, the airport, airlines, everybody's affected at that point. And that's what we saw last year. Businesses, there were businesses on both coasts that been around for 10 or 20 years that had to shut down. People moved away. I had some of my clients former charter clients that just decided they were going other places. And it's really sad to see that, especially when you grow up in a community and you love that place and you love living there. To see a preventable disaster ruin it is it's tough.
Right. You mentioned it's a public policy issue, and how would you assess the current political climate in Florida now for dealing with this problem?
Sure. So it's Everglades restoration is a public policy issue. All the different organizations, Captains for Clean Water, Everglades Foundation, Bonefish Tarpon Trust, all these groups that are working on the problem, we're not directly able to go out there and start building projects. You're talking about a 15 or a $20 billion effort over the next decade or two. So what we're doing is motivating the government to take action on these issues. There's funding available from the federal and the state government to put this together. So we try to encourage our policymakers to keep charging forward. And it's when the water's green and it's there's dead fish and whale sharks and turtles and manatees floating up on the beach, it's pretty easy to do that. We can reach 5-6 million people a month on our social media channels and provide opportunities for them to take action. And we saw that happen last year. This quickly became the #1 issue in the 2018 elections in Florida. Everybody was paying attention to it, and a lot of that is the result of the action that individuals, our supporters have taken, sharing our message on social media. We had over 30,000 of our members last year that sent letters to Congress, and that helped get legislation passed to authorize some of these projects and fund some of these projects. But it's not that easy when the water's clear and the fishing's great. People want to go out there and catch tarpon, not figure out which member of Congress they need to write to. So that's why we think really outside the box at Captains for Clean Water. We have recently taken over the Florida Skiff Challenge, which is a boat race that goes from Pensacola all the way around the peninsula up to Jacksonville. You go all the way around the state in 16 to 18 foot skiffs with a 70 horse motor. We were able to reach over 3 million people in 4 days on social media with the Florida Skiff Challenge this year. And again, we were using it to raise awareness to the political process, what was going on in Tallahassee and in Washington. We had our members outside of Florida emailing DC, telling them to get more money in the budget for Everglades restoration, which happened. We're moving forward there. And then we had our Florida members reaching out to the state legislature, trying to get them to appropriate funds, and we received record funding for Everglades restoration at the state level this year, which it's awesome. And the reason that's happening is because all these people are paying attention and reaching out and letting their policymakers know that they work for us and they're going to do what we say. And it's moving in the right direction, and it's all about these outside the box opportunities, trying to get people's attention when the water is clear, because we have to have progress every year on this issue.
You mentioned you have members from all 50 states, but you're still mainly focused on the Florida problems. But do you see potential for this ever branching out, like a chapter in Louisiana, a chapter in Maryland, places where you do have estuaries and problems with water.
Yeah, and I can't say what that would ever look like, or if or when or anything like that.
I'm
But
getting ahead of myself.
yeah, but I will say that if people across the country don't step up in the way that Floridians have stepped up and Americans have stepped up for Everglades restoration, we're going to continue to see a lot of problems. I mean, the Mississippi River Delta, a place that's very special to me, awesome fishing out there. They're losing almost a football field of marsh every hour, and that's not going to get any better until a lot of people get really upset and make a really big stink out of it. You know, Bristol Bay in Alaska, if people don't raise all hell, they're going to have copper mines and gold mines and all kinds of other stuff up there. And you know, all the other fisheries we have in this country, everywhere that there's water is at risk. You know, more and more people living in this world, and the amount of pollution and disregard for waterways. You know, we're all living in houses with AC and, you know, working in offices with AC, and it's really easy to disconnect from the natural world if it's not where you are every day. And fishing guides are really one of the very few industries that people are on the water every day, looking at it and relying on it to make a living. So it's you know, I think fishing guides across the country really need to, and really across the world, you know, anywhere there's a fishery that's in danger, the fishing guides need to be the ones that are the first to blow the whistle when something needs to change.
Well, how can people get involved with Captains for Clean Water?
So you can get involved with Captains for Clean Water by going to captainsforcleanwater.org, follow our social channels. The best thing you can do is educate yourself. It's not about making donations, it's not about doing anything like that. It's about going to our website, you know, listening to watch all the videos, read about it. If you educate yourself, the next best thing you can do is go tell all your friends about it. Tell them, you know, a lot of people just don't know about it. It's out of sight, out of mind, and you need to make it the first thing they think about, because the Everglades and Florida's water quality are completely, our economy is completely dependent on, and our way of life is completely dependent on the Everglades and water quality in Florida.
Captain Daniel Andrews, best of luck with your important mission. You're doing a great job.
Thank you
Keep
very
it up.
much. Thanks for
Appreciate
helping
your
us.
time, and all the best.
Yeah, thanks for helping us raise awareness.